Hello, and welcome to Lyla's Lullabies, where we spend time exploring with Lyla, a traveler who wanders the world at her own pace, while sharing her most enriching and restorative moments with you. In tonight's story, we'll follow Lyla as she explores the vibrant city of Medellín, Colombia. There's nowhere you need to be, nothing you need to remember. Just settle in, get comfortable, and let yourself go. We're so glad you're here. Whenever you're ready, let's begin. The plane descended into the valley, and Lyla pressed her face to the window to watch Medellín emerge from the morning mist. The city spread out below, nestled between green mountains, the buildings climbing up the hillsides in seemingly impossible density. Even from the air, she could feel the energy of the place, a city that had transformed itself, that wore its reinvention proudly. The mountains rose on all sides, their peaks catching the early light, creating a natural bowl that held the city in its embrace. At the airport, Lyla's friend Soledad was waiting just outside arrivals, her dark hair pulled back in a ponytail, wearing jeans and a colorful blouse that caught the morning sun, looking exactly as Lyla remembered from their time at the co-working space in Lisbon. They'd bonded over their search for kombucha and shared complaints about deadlines, late-night conversations about where to go next and whether settling down somewhere was giving up or growing up. They'd stayed in touch with occasional messages and video calls, the kind of digital nomad friendship that understood the peculiar challenges of working while traveling. Lyla, bienvenida a Medellín. Soledad pulled her into a warm hug that felt like coming home despite this being Lyla's first time in the city. ¿Cómo estuvo el vuelo? Largo pero bien, I'm so happy to be here, I can't believe I'm finally visiting. Come on, let's get breakfast. I know a place in El Poblado that makes the best arepas. You must be starving. They took an Uber into the city, the road winding down from the airport through neighborhoods that changed character every few minutes. Medellín gradually revealed itself. The neighborhoods stacked up the mountainsides like colorful building blocks, the metro line cutting through the valley like a silver thread, the August sky impossibly blue and clear above it all. The driver had the radio on, playing vallenato, and Soledad hummed along occasionally, clearly comfortable with the rhythms of the city. Soledad pointed out landmarks as they drove, her pride in the city evident in every gesture. There was the stadium where Atlético Nacional played. There was the university. That building was the new cultural center that had just opened. Her Spanish excelente. There was the idioma de no courier when speaking to the driver was rapid and colloquial, peppered with paisa expressions that Lyla could follow, but would never have thought to use herself. El Poblado was the upscale neighborhood where many expats and digital nomads settled, Soledad explained, though she lived in a different area that was more authentically paisa. The neighborhood had tree-lined streets and modern buildings mixed with older houses, cafes on every corner, people walking dogs or heading to yoga classes, the international feel tempered by Colombian warmth. The cafe she chose was on a quiet side street, with outdoor tables shaded by a massive ceiba tree, its branches spreading like a natural umbrella. The morning air was warm, but not yet hot, that perfect August temperature, before the day's heat really settled in. The cafe was busy with locals, business people having meetings over coffee, students with laptops open, older couples reading newspapers and talking quietly. They ordered arepas, corn cake split and filled with cheese, one topped with an egg that had been fried until the edges were crispy but the yolk still soft, another with creamy avocado and a sprinkle of salt. Fresh fruit arrived in generous ceramic bowls, papaya the color of sunset, mango so ripe it was almost melting, pineapple that was sweet and slightly tart. Everything perfectly ripe and tasting like it had been picked that morning. And coffee, of course, Colombian coffee served black and strong in small cups, the kind that would wake you up and keep you going for hours. The arepas were perfect, crispy outside from the grill, soft and slightly sweet inside, the corn flavor pronounced and satisfying. Lyla added avocado and a squeeze of lime to hers, and the combination was simple but exactly right, the kind of food that felt nourishing on every level. The coffee was as good as promised, smooth and rich, without any bitterness, with notes of chocolate and caramel that lingered on the tongue. "This is exactly what I needed," Lyla said, reaching for another piece of mango. "Real food, and real coffee, not brewed at 30,000 feet. Wait until you have bandeja paisa for lunch, that's when you'll really understand Colombian food. It's basically enough food for 3 people served to one, but it's delicious." A server came by to refill their coffee, and Soledad chatted with her briefly in Spanish, asking about the woman's daughter who was apparently studying at the university. The server beamed, clearly pleased to be asked, and they exchanged a few more pleasantries before she moved on to another table. This was what Lyla had always admired about Soledad, her ability to connect with people, to make small interactions feel meaningful rather than transactional. As they ate, Soledad outlined the day. "I thought we'd start with Comuna 13. It's one of the most important places to understand Medellin's transformation. Then we'll take the metrocable up to Parque Arví. The views are incredible and the forest up there is beautiful. Come back down for lunch, see Plaza Botero and the museum in the afternoon, and catch sunset at Pueblito Paisa. Then dinner in Provenza, which you'll love. Sound good?" "Sounds perfect. I'm in your hands." They finished breakfast slowly, not rushing, watching the cafe fill up around them as more people arrived for their morning coffee and arepas. A group of university students at the next table were having an animated discussion about something, their voices rising and falling with passion, and Soledad smiled. "I love that about Medellín," she said. "People are so engaged, so alive. There's this energy here that I haven't found anywhere else." They took the metro toward Comuna 13, the train system clean and efficient, filled with people heading to work or school. The cars were modern and air-conditioned, with clear announcements in Spanish at each stop. Soledad explained that the metro had been transformative for Medellín. Before it existed, the neighborhoods on the hillsides had been isolated, cut off from opportunity and services, their residents spending hours on overcrowded buses just to get to work. "The metrocable was even more important," she said as they got off the train and transferred to the cable car system. It connected the poorest neighborhoods to the city center. Suddenly people could get to jobs, to hospitals, to schools. It changed everything. It sounds simple, but access to transportation can be a game changer. The cable car system was impressive, gondolas that moved steadily upward, providing both transportation and spectacular views. Comuna 13 appeared below them as they climbed, a neighborhood that seemed to defy gravity. Houses painted in bright colors climbing the steep hillside at angles that looked impossible. The streets barely visible between buildings, laundry hanging from balconies, and satellite dishes sprouting from roofs like mechanical flowers. Soledad explained the history as they rose, her voice quiet and serious. She talked about how Comuna 13 had been one of the most dangerous neighborhoods in the city during the drug wars, how it had been a stronghold for different armed groups, how military operations had caused terrible violence, civilians caught in the crossfire. She talked about the slow, painful process of rebuilding, the community organizations, the artists who'd started painting murals, the residents who'd refused to let their neighborhood be defined only by its darkest moments. There are still challenges, she said, watching the neighborhood pass below them, but it's nothing like it was. And the community has been amazing. They've used art and culture to reclaim their neighborhood, to tell their own story, instead of letting others tell it for them. They got off at the station and walked into the neighborhood, and immediately the art was everywhere. Murals covered every available wall, turning the narrow streets into an open-air gallery. The colors were bold and vibrant, bright blues and yellows and reds and greens, murals that celebrated life and memory and resistance. Some were political, depicting the neighborhood's transformation from violence to peace. Others were purely celebratory, showing children playing, families gathering, the simple dignity of daily life. The famous outdoor escalators cut through the neighborhood, a series of covered escalators that climbed the steep hillside, making accessible what had once required climbing hundreds of exhausting steps. For the elderly, for mothers with small children, for anyone carrying heavy loads, these escalators had been life-changing. They rode the escalators up, passing locals going about their daily routines, women carrying shopping bags, children in school uniforms, workers heading to jobs, everyone moving with a sense of purpose and ownership. Tourists with cameras were present but not overwhelming, and the neighborhood felt lived in casa, authentic, not a museum piece created for visitors. At various points, Soledad stopped to point out particular murals, explaining their meaning or the artist who'd created them. One massive piece depicted the neighborhood's violent past transforming into a peaceful present. On one side, images of soldiers and weapons and fear. On the other side, children playing soccer, families eating together, artists painting. The transformation was literal and symbolic, rendered in bold strokes that seemed to pulse with energy. Another mural celebrated the resilience of the women of Comuna 13, their faces rendered in bold strokes and brilliant colors, each woman's expression showing strength and determination. Soledad explained that women had been crucial to the neighborhood's transformation, organizing community groups, demanding peace, protecting their children while refusing to be silenced. Street performers and musicians were set up at different levels of the escalators. A group of young men were performing hip-hop, their lyrics in rapid Spanish about life in the Comuna, about transformation and pride and refusing to forget where you came from. A small crowd had gathered, people nodding along to the beat, some filming on their phones. Further up, a man was painting a new mural in real time, his movements confident and practiced, the design already taking shape, what looked like a hummingbird, rendered in brilliant greens and blues, emerging from a flower. A woman nearby was selling handicrafts made by neighborhood residents, woven bags, painted wooden boxes, jewelry made from recycled materials. Soledad stopped to look at the bags, and they chatted. Estos son hermosos, Soledad said, examining a bag with a geometric pattern in blues and oranges. Gracias, mi hermana los hace, the woman replied. Cada uno es único, hecho a mano. Soledad bought one, and the woman wrapped it carefully in tissue paper, including a small card with information about the artisan who'd made it. The transaction was more than commercial. It felt like a connection, a way of supporting the community's creative economy. They reached the top of the escalators and emerged into an area with more open space, trees providing shade, and viewpoints offering spectacular vistas of the city below. The valley spread out before them, Medellín stretching in all directions, a sea of buildings and streets and green spaces, the mountains rising on the other side creating a dramatic backdrop. From this height, you could see the city's geography clearly, how it filled the valley floor and then climbed the mountainsides, defying the terrain, adapting to every available space. The transformation here isn't just about safety, Soledad explained as they stood looking at the view. It's about giving people opportunity, the chance to write their own story instead of having it written for them by others. The art is part of that. It's the community saying, this is who we are, this is what we survived, this is what we're building. They walked through the area a bit more, stopping at a small cafe where a woman was selling fresh fruit juice and arepas. They bought passion fruit juice, maracuya, served cold in plastic cups, the flavor intense and sweet tart, refreshing in the warm morning. The woman asked Soledad where they were from, and when she learned Lyla was visiting from abroad, she insisted on giving them extra napkins and wishing Lyla a wonderful time in Medellín, her warmth genuine and touching. Come on, Soledad said after they'd finished their juice. We should catch the metrocable to Parque Arví. The views from up there are even better, and the forest is beautiful. Back at the metro station, they boarded the metrocable that would take them high above the city. This was a longer ride than the earlier one, climbing steadily up the mountainside, the cable car swaying gently as it moved. The city fell away below, the urban landscape giving way to forest and mountainside, the buildings becoming smaller and smaller until they looked like a child's toys scattered across a green carpet. Other passengers, mostly locals heading to the park for a day out, a few tourists with hiking gear, chatted quietly or looked out the windows. Lyla found the gentle swaying of the cable car soothing, almost meditative, the rhythm combining with the spectacular views to create a sense of peaceful suspension between earth and sky. The metrocable passed over neighborhoods that clung to the mountainside, houses with corrugated metal roofs and colorful walls, small gardens growing vegetables and flowers, streets so steep they seemed to be staircases. Then the houses gave way to forest, thick and green and dense, the kind of cloud forest that characterized these Andean mountains, the trees draped with moss and bromeliads. Parque Arví sat at the top, a nature reserve that seemed impossibly remote despite being connected to the city by cable car. They stepped out into cooler, fresher air, the temperature noticeably lower than in the valley, the scent of pine and eucalyptus replacing the urban smells. The park entrance had signs marking different trails, ranging from short 30-minute walks to serious day hikes that went deep into the reserve. They chose one of the shorter trails, wanting to experience the forest without exhausting themselves before the rest of the day. The path was well maintained and easy, winding through forest that felt primordial and peaceful. Sunlight filtered through the canopy in shafts, creating dramatic lighting effects, and the ground was soft with fallen leaves and moss. Birds called from the canopy, sounds Lyla didn't recognize, tropical species that lived in these mountains. They saw a tanager flash past, brilliant red against the green leaves, and heard what might have been a woodpecker somewhere deeper in the forest. Occasionally they'd pass other hikers, families with children pointing at flowers and insects, couples holding hands and walking slowly, serious hikers with proper gear heading toward the longer trails. "This is what's amazing about Medellín," Soledad said as they walked. "You can be in the middle of a major city with 3 million people, and then 15 minutes later you're in the mountains, in the forest, with birds and trees and clean air. It's one of the reasons I decided to stay. I can have urban life when I want it and escape to this when I need to." They didn't walk far, just enough to feel the peace of the forest, to breathe the mountain air, to appreciate the contrast with the urban energy below. At a viewpoint along the trail, they paused to look back at Medellín spread across the valley, the city looking almost toy-like from this height, the buildings reduced to geometric shapes, the streets to lines, the whole complex urban ecosystem simplified by distance into something comprehensible and beautiful. They sat on a wooden bench at the viewpoint for a while, not talking much, just absorbing the peace. The air was cool and slightly humid, carrying the scent of flowers and earth and green growing things. Somewhere in the forest, a stream was running, its sound distant but present, adding to the general sense of being somewhere wild and old and indifferent to human concerns. Eventually they made their way back to the metrocable station and descended back into the city. The transition was gradual but dramatic. From forest to scattered houses to dense neighborhoods to the urban core, the temperature rising as they descended, the sounds changing from bird calls to traffic and human voices, the whole texture of the world shifting from natural to constructed. Back in the city, lunchtime had arrived, and Soledad took them to a traditional restaurant in the center not far from Plaza Botero. The restaurant was unpretentious and busy, clearly popular with locals, the walls decorated with photos of old Medellín and ceramic plates in traditional patterns. The menu was handwritten on a chalkboard, and the prices were remarkably reasonable given the generous portions. "Time for bandeja paisa," Soledad announced. "I hope you're hungry." "Actually, you don't need to be hungry. You'll be hungry by the time you finish anyway." The bandeja paisa arrived on a platter that barely fit on the table, and Lyla understood what Soledad had meant. It was absurdly generous, almost comically so. Red beans cooked with pork until they were creamy and rich, white rice fluffed and perfect, ground beef seasoned with cumin and garlic, chorizo grilled until the casing was crispy, chicharrón, fried pork belly, so crispy it shattered when you bit into it, a fried egg with a runny yolk, fried plantain caramelized at the edges, thick slices of avocado, and an arepa. It was a kind of meal designed for someone who'd been working in the fields all day, burning thousands of calories, needing serious fuel. This is so much food, Lyla said, staring at the platter with a mix of awe and concern. It's a paisa thing. The people from this region don't do anything small. Just eat what you can, and we can take leftovers if you want. They ate slowly, sampling each element, trying different combinations. The beans were rich and flavorful, with a depth that suggested hours of slow cooking. The pork belly was crispy and salty and absolutely addictive. The plantain was perfectly cooked, sweet and soft, a nice contrast to the savory meats. The fried egg tied everything together, its yolk running into the rice and beans and creating a sauce that brought all the flavors together. The server, an older woman with a kind face and efficient manner, checked on them periodically, clearly pleased when Soledad complimented the beans. They chatted for a moment about the recipe, Soledad asking if she used a pressure cooker or traditional pot, the woman explaining with pride that she still did it the old way, slow cooking for hours with pork and seasonings her mother had taught her. Es el secreto, the woman said, tapping the side of her nose. Paciencia y amor. Así se cocina bien. After lunch, they walked to Plaza Botero, moving slowly because moving quickly seemed impossible after that meal. The plaza was nearby, and as they approached, the sculptures began appearing, bronze figures rising from the pavement like friendly giants, Fernando Botero's unmistakable style visible from blocks away. The plaza was busy with locals and tourists, people sitting on benches reading or chatting, street vendors selling everything from fresh fruit to handmade jewelry to knockoff designer bags, the sculptures presiding over it all, with their cheerful exaggeration. Children climbed on some of them, people posed for photos with others, and the sculptures seemed to invite this interaction, to welcome the democratic chaos of public space. Botero's distinctive style was evident in every piece, everything exaggerated, voluminous, rounded to the point of caricature, but rendered with such love and skill that it never felt mocking. A fat horse with a tiny rider, a chubby soldier standing at attention, a rotund woman reclining with serene confidence, a plump cat that children were currently using as a jungle gym. The bronze was polished smooth in places where countless hands had touched it, creating patches of lighter metal that caught the afternoon sun. Lyla had seen isolated examples of his works in cities across the world, but seeing them in collection like this was a whole other experience. Botero donated these to the city, Soledad explained as they wandered through the plaza, along with all the works in the museum next door. He grew up in Medellín, and even though he became famous internationally, he never forgot where he came from. He wanted art to be accessible to everyone, not locked away in private collections or expensive galleries. So he gave this to the city, no conditions, just wanting people to enjoy them. They sat on a bench for a while, just watching the plaza's life unfold. A man played guitar nearby, his case open for coins, performing vallenato with skill and evident enjoyment, his voice warm and slightly rough, in a way that suited the music. A vendor sold obleas, thin wafers with arequipe, dulce de leche between them, and they bought one to share. The caramel sweet and thick, the wafers crispy and delicate, the whole thing messy and delicious. Street photographers wandered through with cameras and costumes, offering to take pictures with people dressed in traditional paisa clothing or with props. A group of university students was doing some kind of survey, politely asking passers-by questions and noting down answers. The whole scene had a gentle energy, people going about their business but not in a rush, the plaza functioning as it was meant to, a public space where the public actually gathered. The Museo de Antioquia was right there, housed in a beautiful colonial building with white walls and traditional architecture. They went inside, escaping the afternoon heat into the cool, quiet interior. The museum's collection was extensive, but they focused on the Botero rooms, more of his work, paintings this time, in the same exaggerated style. The paintings depicted Colombian life with humor and affection, families at dinner, musicians playing, bullfighters in the ring, bishops and generals and everyday people, all rendered in Botero's distinctive rounded forms. There was something democratic about his style, the way he applied the same exaggeration to everyone regardless of their station. The archbishop looked as rotund as the peasant, the general as chubby as the child. It was leveling, in its way, finding common humanity in the shared roundness. They also wandered through rooms showing work by other Colombian and Latin American artists, and a fascinating section on the region's pre-Columbian history, with ceramics and gold work from the indigenous peoples who'd lived in these mountains long before the Spanish arrived. The gold work was particularly striking, intricate pieces showing sophisticated metalworking techniques, designs that were both abstract and representational, objects that had been sacred and ceremonial now displayed behind glass for contemporary viewers to admire. They didn't linger too long. Museums could wait for another visit, Soledad said, and she wanted to make sure they caught sunset at Pueblito Paisa. They stepped back out into the afternoon heat, which had peaked and was beginning its slow descent toward evening. A taxi took them up the winding road to Pueblito Paisa, the driver navigating the switchbacks with practiced ease while playing vallenato on the radio. The road climbed through neighborhoods, each level offering different views of the city below, until they arrived at Pueblito Paisa, a replica colonial village built on a hill overlooking the city, complete with a small church, a plaza, and a few shops. The village itself was admittedly touristy. The shops sold handicrafts and souvenirs. The church was used mostly for weddings and photo ops, the whole thing a bit too perfectly preserved to feel entirely authentic. But the views were spectacular, and that was clearly why most people came. From the viewpoint, they could see all of Medellín spread below, the entire valley visible from this height, the neighborhoods climbing the hillsides on all sides, the valley floor packed with buildings and streets and green spaces, the metro line visible as a thin line cutting through, The mountains rising in layers toward the horizon, each rich a slightly different shade of blue-gray. The city looked both immense and contained, filling the available space completely while still being bounded by the mountains. They sat on a low wall at the viewpoint, watching the city below and the sky above, waiting for sunset. Other people had the same idea, couples leaning against each other, families with children who ran around the plaza, groups of friends passing around beers, everyone gathering to watch the day end. There was something communal about it, this shared appreciation of beauty, this collective pause to acknowledge the transition from day to night. "Tell me honestly," Soledad said, taking a sip from a bottle of water they'd bought from a vendor, "what do you think of the vibe here in Medellín?" "I love it," Lyla said without hesitation. "There's so much energy here, so much life. And the transformation story is incredible. You can feel that people are proud of what they've built, what they've overcome. It doesn't feel like they're hiding from the past, but they're not defined by it either." That's exactly it. The city isn't perfect, and we don't pretend it is. But there's this sense of possibility, of moving forward, of writing a different story. It's inspiring to be part of that. The sun sank lower, the sky shifting through shades of orange and pink and purple, the clouds catching the light and holding it. The city lights began to come on, slowly at first and then more rapidly as dusk deepened, creating a constellation of lights in the valley below. The mountains became silhouettes, their details fading into darkness, their shapes still visible against the lighter sky. When the sun finally disappeared behind the western mountains, the sky held its color for a long moment, that magical time when the world seems to hold its breath before fully committing to night. The city lights grew brighter as the sky grew darker, and Medellín transformed into its evening self, alive with lights and motion and the promise of all the things that happen after dark. "Ready for dinner?" Soledad asked as the last color faded from the sky. "There's a neighborhood called Provenza that has great restaurants. It's become very trendy in the last few years, but in a good way. There's genuinely good food there, and it still feels like Medellín, not like it's trying to be somewhere else." The taxi took them back down into the valley and to Provenza, a neighborhood that revealed itself gradually as an area of tree-lined streets, the restaurants and bars glowing with warm light from their windows and terraces. People spilled out onto sidewalks with drinks and laughter, outdoor seating filled with groups of friends and couples, the whole area humming with that Friday evening energy of people ready to relax and celebrate the week's end. They found the restaurant Soledad recommended tucked away on a quieter street, the entrance modest but the interior warm and inviting. The space was modern but not sterile, with exposed brick walls and wooden tables, plants hanging from the ceiling, and Edison bulb lighting creating a soft glow. A chalkboard listed specials in careful handwriting, and the kitchen was partially open, letting diners watch the cooks work. They were seated at a table near the window, with a view of the street and the evening activity. The menu featured Colombian food with modern touches, traditional recipes reimagined, local ingredients prepared with contemporary techniques. They ordered to share, the way you should always eat with good friends in good restaurants. The ceviche arrived first, fresh fish cured in lime juice with mango, coconut, and chili, served with plantain chips. The fish was delicate and sweet, the mango adding tropical flavor, the coconut providing richness, the chili giving just enough heat to wake up your palate. They ate it slowly, scooping it onto the crispy plantain chips, each bite a perfect balance of flavors and textures. Next came grilled trout, the fish butterflied and cooked over charcoal, served with coconut rice in a sauce made from local herbs. The trout was perfectly cooked, the flesh flaking easily, slightly smoky from the grill. The coconut rice was fragrant and slightly sweet, and the herb sauce added freshness and complexity. They also ordered patacones, fried green plantains smashed flat and fried again until crispy, topped with hogao sauce, a Colombian sauce of tomatoes, onions, and garlic, and crumbled cheese. They were addictive, salty and crispy and rich, the kind of thing you kept reaching for, even when you were full. Everything was fresh and flavorful, the presentations beautiful without being pretentious. They sipped local beer, Club Colombia, cold and crisp, perfect for the warm August evening. The restaurant had that perfect energy, busy but not frantic, the staff friendly and efficient, the other diners clearly enjoying themselves. Conversations in Spanish and English and other languages mixing together in a pleasant murmur. Soledad waved to a few people she knew at other tables, introducing Lyla to a couple who stopped by briefly, friends who worked at a startup together with Soledad, friendly and curious about Lyla's travels, swapping recommendations for places to visit, and asking what she thought of Medellín. "That's Medellín for you," Soledad said after they'd returned to their own conversation. "It's big enough to be interesting, small enough to feel like a community. I run into people I know all the time, but I'm always meeting new people too. There's this constant flow of digital nomads and expats and Colombians returning from abroad. It keeps things fresh." They finished dinner with coffee, of course, and shared a dessert of tres leches cake. The sponge soaked in 3 types of milk until it was impossibly moist and sweet, topped with whipped cream and a sprinkle of cinnamon. It was rich and satisfying, the perfect end to the meal. After dinner, they took an Uber to Soledad's apartment in a neighborhood that was residential but clearly up and coming. With new cafes and shops mixed among family homes, the buildings mostly low-rise and painted in warm colors. Her building was modest from the outside, a simple concrete structure with balconies and plants, clothes hanging to dry on some of them. The kind of building where actual Colombians lived, rather than wealthy expats. The apartment was on the 3rd floor, and Soledad unlocked the door to reveal a space that was small but clearly home, books on shelves, art on the walls, a laptop set up on a desk by the window, a comfortable couch with colorful cushions. It felt lived in and loved, the accumulation of someone who'd stopped just passing through and had started actually living somewhere. "Come on," Soledad said, leading her through the apartment and up a final flight of stairs. "I want to show you the best part." The rooftop terrace was simple but lovely. A few chairs that looked like they'd been collected from different places. Some potted plants, including herbs that Soledad clearly used for cooking. String lights that cast a gentle glow, creating pools of warm light against the darkness. But the real attraction was the view. From here they could see across the valley, the city lights creating patterns in the darkness, streets visible as lines of light, buildings as luminous blocks, the whole city glowing against the dark mountains. The lights climbed the hillsides on all sides, creating layers and depths, some areas brightly lit, and others showing just the scattered points of light. The mountains were visible as darker shapes against the star-filled sky, their peaks sharp against the lighter darkness of the sky. They settled into chairs and sat in comfortable silence for a moment, just absorbing the night, the view, the feeling of being suspended between city and sky. The sounds of the city drifted up from below, music from somewhere, a mix of salsa and reggaeton and what might have been vallenato, voices rising and falling in conversation and laughter. The occasional car passing on the street below, a dog barking in the distance, the general ambient hum of a city that was very much alive and awake. But up here it all felt distant, filtered, softened into a gentle background that was present but not intrusive. "Look at the stars," Lyla said, leaning back in her chair to see more of the sky. Away from the brightest lights, the stars were visible, not as clearly as in truly dark places, but present nonetheless, scattered across the darkness, like salt spilled on a dark cloth. The Southern Cross was visible, and other constellations Lyla didn't know the names of, patterns that had guided people through these mountains for thousands of years. "I come up here almost every night," Soledad said quietly, her voice peaceful and content, "even if just for 15 minutes before bed. Something about being up here, seeing the city from above, it helps me think clearly. Reminds me why I stayed, why I chose this place to be home, at least for now." They sat quietly for a long while, watching the city lights twinkle below and the stars wheel slowly above in their ancient patterns. A cool breeze moved across the rooftop, bringing with it the scent of the mountains, pine and earth, and that indefinable smell of high places. The temperature had dropped to perfect comfort, warm enough to be pleasant but cool enough to be refreshing after the heat of the day. Lyla felt the day settling into her. The bright murals of Comuna 13, and the stories they told, the green peace of Parque Arví with its ancient trees and birdsong, Botero's playful sculptures presiding over their plaza, the golden sunset over the valley, the warmth of shared meals and good conversation. She thought about Soledad finding her place here, creating a life in the city that had reinvented itself, that wore its scars and its triumphs with equal pride, that refused to be defined only by its darkest chapters. There was something brave about that, about choosing to build a life in a place that was still figuring itself out, that was still in the process of becoming whatever it would become. "Thank you for today," Lyla said finally, breaking the comfortable silence. "For showing me your Medellín, for sharing all of this with me, for being such a generous guide and friend." "Thank you for coming," Soledad replied. "It's different showing someone around, you know. Makes me see the city fresh again, remember what's special about it, what drew me here in the first place." They stayed on the roof as the night deepened, the temperature dropping slightly, comfortable and easy in each other's presence. They talked about everything and nothing, old stories from the co-working space where they met, mutual friends scattered across the world, the sometimes strange life of a traveler, and whether any place ever felt fully like home, or whether home became something you carried with you rather than a fixed location. The music continued somewhere below, a soundtrack to the night, and the city lights glowed warm and constant against the darkness, and the mountains stood silent and eternal around the valley, witnesses to everything that had happened here and everything yet to come. The stars slowly turned overhead, patient and distant, the same stars that had watched over these mountains long before there was a city here, that would continue watching long after everything changed again. Lyla watched them, thinking about journeys and transformations, about cities that refused to be defined by their darkest moments, about friends who created homes in unexpected places, and invited you to see them through their eyes, to understand not just the place but what the place meant, what it offered, what it asked of you in return. The music continued somewhere below, and the city lights glowed warm against the darkness, and the mountains stood silent and eternal around the valley. Medellín breathed its particular rhythm, complex, energetic, proud, constantly evolving, and Lyla breathed with it, peaceful and present, grateful for the day and the night and the stars overhead, for the particular gift of being exactly where she was, in this moment, in this city that had learned to write its own story. Most of all, she was grateful for the company of her friend, who had found a place in this city of transformation, and invited Lyla to see it, to feel it, and to understand why someone might choose to stay.